Hey everyone, welcome to Armbars and Sidebars, a show where we get to share our love for professional wrestling and hear the stories from those involved in the business. Today, we are joined by a veteran commentator in professional wrestling, along with other combat sports, including boxing and mixed martial arts. You've likely seen them on Hulk Hogan Celebrity Championship Wrestling, Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin Tour, TNA Wrestling, Paragon Pro Wrestling, and of course, Championship Wrestling. Todd, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. Always excited to talk about wrestling.
Oh, definitely. And you're a great person to talk to because your career goes back way further than even I realized. I knew your work from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood and then TNA here and there, Paragon, but I didn't realize how far it went back, and I definitely want to dive into all that. It's very exciting. But first thing I like to do is get plugs out of the way early on. We'll also go over them at the end. But where can people find you? Is there anything you want to plug? Anything big coming up for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can find me on social media, just at T Keneley on Instagram, Todd Keneley on Twitter, and I mean, most of my posts are about upcoming stuff. But yeah, I mean, the one thing I definitely want to plug right now is the Red Carpet Rumble. That's kind of the signature event of the United Wrestling Network and Championship Wrestling. And we didn't have one last year. It had been annual, but it's good to have it. It's good to have it back and on a grander scale. And just historically, I think it was Sean Ricker, Eli Drake, that won the first Red Carpet Rumble back in the day. That was 2012 because I was actually at TNA at the time and went to call that show while I was still working for Impact. But it's a good time, and it's funny that it got pushed and that it's going to be in January, because then the Royal Rumble won't be the only Rumble in January. But it's pretty much a similar concept, except it is 30 participants. When it gets down to the final two, then it becomes a one-on-one match, pinfall submission. And we've already got some names that are kind of throwing their hat in the ring. Cole Cabana, who's a former world champion back in the NWA days of our show, has already announced that he's entering. Plus, it's just going to be a super event. There's going to be other big matches. Danny Limelight's going to be in action against Eddie Kingston. That should be great. Hammerstone, who's in the event's in Arizona. It's in Mesa, Arizona. So Hammerstone, an Arizona guy, he's going to be wrestling Ortiz from AEW. Some other AEW familiar faces, Sean Dean, Joey Janela is going to be there. So it's going to be a stacked card. A lot of the great talent from the United Wrestling Network, but also some from names from elsewhere, and should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a stack card. There's a lot of big names on the show coming up. And it's interesting that, you mentioned it taking place in Arizona. I would love, if possible, for you to talk a little bit about Championship Wrestling's transition. We'll get more into you joining the company and everything like that later. But I know for a long time, you had Championship Wrestling from Arizona, you had Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And there was like kind of a consolidation with the United Wrestling Network. Could you talk about how that all works, please?
Sure. I mean, David Marquez, who's the owner and president of United Wrestling Network, uh, originally kind of entered the business under Harley Race out in Missouri with World League and World Legion Wrestling. And so he kind of came up with that old school mentality. Obviously, Harley was a huge part of the original National Wrestling Alliance, was the NWA World Champion in the territory days. And David Marquez always kind of saw an advantage in either preserving or bringing back that old system, because I think he always just appreciated having unique talent to a region and regional champions, but giving them the experience of going on the road, traveling. Dave is always about getting talent TV ready. But a big part of being TV ready and working for a major promotion, if you work for an AEW or a WWE, is travel and how you conduct yourself on the road and being able to deal with that type of schedule. And so I know Dave always really liked that thought of, let's take our talent, let's get them TV ready, and then let's have regional promotions all under the same roof of the United Wrestling Network. Dave obviously had a lot of history with the NWA. They had a falling out. It's been on again, off again, and that was really the birth of the United Wrestling Network as kind of its own governing body and its own territorial system. So yeah, we had championship wrestling from Arizona out there in Mesa. We had Peter Avalon was a big part of that program. He's pretty Peter Avalon there. He was producer Peter Avalon, and he was involved legitimately behind the scenes producing and writing, but also on air as a character and as a wrestler. And it was a great product. And then we had for a while championship wrestling from Atlanta, because our shows, and then we have Memphis, which Dustin and Maria Starr are still running that independently, but utilizing our talent and working with us. But that is still kind of its own entity. But the idea eventually became, hey, let's consolidate everything and make it one national show. And I believe it's still on over 200 networks across the U.S. And so it's great for us and for me as a broadcaster, because we had so much great talent, guys like a Lord Crew in Atlanta that now is on our show and has been coming out. A lot of Arizona talent that has been big on our show, the Hammerstones of the world, but also EJ Sparks, who was a fixture in championship wrestling from Arizona before he became a big part of the national championship wrestling program. So the idea was, let's put it all under one roof. And eventually, since the TV's in so many markets anyway, then we'll start branching out and go back to those markets. And it's going to kick off here with Arizona coming up in a few weeks.
That's very cool. And, David Marquez gotten a lot of praise from people we've interviewed on the channel so far. Joe Galley, Johnny Lacroix. So you guys can go check the interviews back in the archives. And the big thing they brought up that you brought up, TV ready, that the product of, championship wrestling from Hollywood up until now, it's very much not your typical independent wrestling company. It's very much more television geared. And I'm up in New England and I got the television off and on up here. So it shows how widespread it is, really. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's on, it's the episodes, new episodes come out every Sunday on YouTube. It's actually Memphis's channel that puts it out. But so for instance, this week, if you have our program on traditional TV, Christmas Eve will be the Danny Limelight, Jordan Clearwater, United Wrestling Network world title match that is a long time coming. Danny Limelight won the Golden Opportunity tournament. So it was, which was a tournament of triple threat matches. And the finals was Danny and Bateman and Willie Mack. So tough competition, obviously. And then Danny had qualified into the tournament by beating Slice Boogie, who's one of his stablemates in the bodega. And then first round, I gotta test myself here, was Shane Haste and Jack. It was Jack Banning of the Institution. So that was Danny Limelight's road to earning the number one contendership and a shot at the title. And in the meantime, Jordan Clearwater was going through the likes of Frankie Kazarian, Carlito, Chris Adonis, Willie Mack in this kind of historic title reign, but always using the Embassy and Prince Nana and Invictus Cash and 7 foot tall Talos to get by these big names. So it really, this feud kind of has a very much a little bit of that flavor of a Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, of a Danny Limelight, who's kind of a people's champion, came from the streets, was a Marine. He's a single dad, fought his way through. And then you've got, the Golden Boy coming out with the extravagant robes, and he's got the backup of the Embassy and Prince Nana and claiming to have beaten all this great talent, when of course, if you watch the matches, how he's winning these matches. So that it just, the storytelling is there. And having just recently called the title matchup, I really think it is something special. It's going to be given a full episode, with interviews and history leading up to the match. And so I encourage fans of kind of that old school 60-minute time limit. If it doesn't go that long, we've got other matches waiting in reserve. That type of presentation of really giving a lot of respect and importance to a world title match. That's what this episode's all about. So it'll be on traditional TV, and then you can find it on YouTube on Christmas.
I love that. That's very cool. And those are two guys and a couple other guys you mentioned in that list who really in the last year have developed from, they were already good, but they've really taken the corner to the next level. And you just love to see the improvements. But let's switch focus and now focus on you, because I'm very curious about your early wrestling career, but before that, your fandom leading into it, if you had a fandom leading into it.
I had a huge fandom.
When did you first see wrestling? Who was your early on favorites? What attracted you to it?
So I first saw wrestling 1985-ish, right around the first WrestleMania. And so, I was a little dude. I was young and I was, impressionable. And I remember, I think I was over at my grandma's house and we're flipping the channels, or I guess back then it might have been flipping the channels. And it was a Saturday morning and wrestling was on. And I remember it was Andre the Giant when he would wrestle, like 3 enhancement talents they'd send out there. And he'd get them in the corner and the big shoulder tackles and stacked them up and sat on them and waved. And I was like, what is this? And I remember vividly it was that. And then like the LJN Wrestling Superstars commercials for the figures back in the day, when they had like all the it was like Hulk Hogan and Big John Studd were going at it in the living room, and Jimmy Superfly Snuka came off the top of the staircase, and the Iron Sheik was there, and it was like just so colorful that I just started watching it religiously. And of course, in that period, which was the heyday of Hulkamania, I got sucked in, and have to admit I was definitely a big time Hulkamaniac.
It makes sense. I mean, those larger than life characters, it's hard to, I wasn't from the 80s. I was born in 91, but I've still went, new generation and attitude era. And sometimes it's hard to explain today because there's so much more grounded in realism, which is great. But some people can't really grasp the appeal of the over the top Hulk Hogan, but there's just something really magnetic, especially as a kid, for it,
Oh, for sure. And then he's taken, I mean, the first show that I ever went to was at the LA Sports Arena, which, was controversially the home of WrestleMania 7 as well, which is no longer there. Now it's Bank of California Stadium. But I went to a house show right around that time that I started watching, like third grade. And the main event was Hogan and Big John Studd. With Bobby Heenan was there, and it was body slam challenge, and Hogan body slammed him on the outside of the ring, and everybody went crazy. And then Heenan got on the mic, "It's got to be in the ring, dummy," and ran off with the money. And I mean, just back then, if you just think of how the colorful characters, and it really fit in with just pop culture at the time. I mean, everything was big and colorful in the 80s, from music to action movies to video games. The arcades were, blowing up, and obviously it was huge. It was just very, very over the top, stuff. And it was a blast. So I got hooked on the characters, I mean, when you had Hulk and Roddy Piper, and then they're next thing you know, they're spawning into a cartoon with Rock and Wrestling, and Saturday night's main event, I just remember really falling in love with. That was my favorite show, because I love, and it's funny because we actually kind of replicated this when we did Primetime Live, or started Primetime Live, the weekly pay-per-view series in the pandemic. Is we started with very much reminiscent of Saturday night's main event, I should say, promos, the colorful promos with the green screen, with the backgrounds behind them and the logos. And I just remember just absolutely, loving that, and the music. And it was Saturday night's main event was such a great show because on the weekends you would see a lot of squash matches and then in segments, you'd have Piper's Pit, you'd have interview segments like that, or the Snake Pit, to build matches. But Saturday night's main event, you saw, back when it was just the big four and it was Survivor Series and Royal Rumble and WrestleMania and SummerSlam, those Saturday night's main events really bridged the gap and gave you those blow-offs to big feuds. And so I fell in love with it. I was all in. I had all the LJN figures, and I would sit there, and the commentary always really resonated with me. As many kids do, but when I would sit there and play, I would be commentating the matches, the whole time. And so just the commentary always stuck with me. And as a kid, I got to say, I loved Vince on Saturday night's main event. Him and Jesse were great because it was just like such frenetic energy. Vince just the 1-2, he got him. No, he didn't either. And, champion Hogan is fired up like never before, Jesse. And then Jesse, how do you cheer for this guy, McMahon? It was just like they had the struggle going in the booth and the struggle in the ring. But growing up, I would have to say, though, that my favorite for sure was as a commentator was Gorilla Monsoon. I love Gorilla.
And that's awesome because Gorilla, he's so interesting because he's so over the top and he's such a larger than life personality. But as a kid, and probably even as an adult at the time, it's just he had this likable charm. He hated the bad guys. He loved the good guys. He hated Heenan. I'm guessing Heenan was probably your least favorite at the time because he was always against Hulkamania.
Yeah, but I still loved Bob, but even looking back, but I still loved Bobby as a character. And I mean, that guy, when he would get, the poor guy, he'd get chased out of the ring by Matilda, the British Bulldogs Bulldog, and he'd take these crazy flip bumps over the ropes. I mean, he gave it his all, man. If he Hogan after like the cage match with Bundy WrestleMania 2, then Heenan's just getting tossed into the bars and just completely throwing his entire body into it. And so he played such an important role. I mean, there's hard to have God without the devil, right? So I mean, Heenan's antics made Hogan that much more of a hero. You had to have that dichotomy, and the Heenan family, was a believable force going after him. And that's when I really started, because at that time, post WrestleMania, like obviously Piper was still a major heel, but kind of spun off into the feud with Mr. T more for a while and didn't really challenge Hogan at that point. And then by the time WrestleMania 3 rolled around, Roddy had turned face. So when I first really started watching, the Heenan family was the major threat.
Just fantastic. He's such a fantastic performer. So as a fan, did you know, or well, not necessarily know, but did you think you wanted to be involved in wrestling? Because this was a different time where, even in the 90s, there was some level of internet. There was talks of the dungeon and the Monster Factory. But at that point, I don't think you were often hearing about any training schools. Maybe in certain areas you heard about the AWAs, but otherwise, I don't think most people knew how to get into wrestling. So was that even a pipe dream for you at the time, or?
It was. I was a fan. Like, it was always a pipe dream. It was, it was something I obviously always hoped to be involved with, but I didn't really see a tangible path at the time. So, I mean, I was first and foremost a fan up until, like you said, into the 90s when Rick Bassman opened up school out here in Southern California, at first in like Mission Viejo, and that was the start of Ultimate Pro Wrestling in UPW, and then I eventually got involved with that.
See, there's something I didn't know, and that's very interesting to me. I didn't know that was your entry point into the business. How did you first hear about it? Do you remember? And were you planning to wrestle, or did you want to be a commentator from the beginning?
Sure. So I was an athlete. I played football my whole life. My brother, was a Division I 4-year starter at USC, went and played in the NFL. I was kind of undersized as a D lineman, but it did make it to USC and got a scholarship at USC and played there. Really had to work hard to get it. But I mean, I was a first team all league and all county defensive lineman and started both ways
Oh
into high
wow.
school. And so I was very athletically inclined. In fact, wrestling was so like sewn into the fabric of who I was that so I went to Mission Viejo High School, which is a pretty notable football school out here. And they had a tradition that you would do these speeches, and they're the Mission Viejo Diablos as their mascot. And so they would have all the players that wanted to would write these speeches, and you would submit them to the coaches, and the coaches would pick a few of them. And then when you're in the locker room, right before you're about to go out, walk that ramp down to the field, the players would read these speeches and get the team fired up. So, and they all started the same way. They all started with Diablo Brothers, Tonight We Must. And mine were just wrestling promos. I mean, I was way over the top. I used to paint the black around my eyes. Like I had like my nickname was the Death Dealer. And then I would cut wrestling promos. I remember the first like Diablo Brothers speech I gave, we were playing a team and their mascot was the Falcons. And I think at one point I said, the only way I like my bird is if it's on a plate. And tonight we shake them and bake them, brothers. And like, I mean, it's like I would I would end the speech. I was number 72. I remember I used to end the speech like I don't know what the language barriers are on this or not, but I would be like,
You can say
I say,
whatever.
okay, so at the end I would just go straight Hogan. It would be like, so what are they gonna do when number 72 and the Diablo crew kick that shit out of you, and all this stuff, and or I would do Taker and do the rest in peace and roll my eyes and stuff because I had the black face paint, and then everybody would just lose their mind and go nuts, and we'd hit the field. So like even in football, wrestling always had a big impact.
So given that you
Uh,
were athletic, was that then your goal is to get into the athletic end of
yeah,
wrestling?
so when Bassman first opened up his school, I did go there and started training a little bit. I think it was Reggie Bennett was a female wrestler that was wrestling in Japan a lot, was training there people there first, and then eventually Tom Howard, who trained a lot of the greats. But it was right around that time. So, like I said, I was undersized. I mean, I had all kinds of accolades in high school, but in terms of moving up to college football, I had to take that one extra step. So I played at Saddleback JC first, at junior college. We ended up winning a national title. It was a blast. And then right around then, Bassman opened up, and I went there and trained a handful of times, and really I wanted to learn the craft. I just was always such a fan, and but it was right around that time that the opportunity came up because SC had some defensive linemen leave early for the draft, that they had some space and I could go in there and had a chance to earn a scholarship. Wasn't a guarantee at first because they scholarships were capped out. So I did walk on at first, but then just busted my ass and earned a scholarship. And
Wow.
so at that point, when I had that opportunity at that type of education and everything else, I put trying to train in terms of a wrestler on the back burner because I just didn't want to get hurt and mess up, that opportunity.
Yeah, that's definitely understandable. So how did the transition come from, you had to pause training, but you eventually got into wrestling broadcasting? How was that transition done?
Yeah. So I always hoped to get into some sort of broadcasting or voiceover work, or because I just was always a character. I was always doing voices and stuff.
Was
And
that
then
what you were doing in college? Sorry to interrupt you, but what were
yeah,
you there for broadcasting and
that
journalism?
was my major, yes. And so and when I was at SC, they had like SCTV, like their own campus station. I was like the sports anchor on that. So I got a little bit of experience, but it was actually um the way it all got connected was I still knew of Rick Bassman and his whole operation from before I went to USC. They didn't have a promotion at the time. They were strictly a school. But then while I was at USC, I met Chris Bell, who's a filmmaker. He did Bigger, Stronger, Faster, which was a documentary on like steroids just in the American culture and sports. He did Prescription Thugs, which was about, prescription drug industry. But at the time, he, was an SC film student, and his brother, Mike Bell, Mad Dog Mike Bell, was kind of a journeyman, wrestled a lot for WWF back in the day. It was him and DeVito, I think, were kind of teaming up, and so he was on the road and just enhancement talent, but then ended up, working for Bassman and training people there, and was on his roster. And then their younger brother, Mark Bell, Smelly, who now his nickname was Smelly, but now he's got is in like the powerlifting industry, and it was shoes and all kinds of other products and podcasts. They were all involved with Rick, and so I mean, it's just crazy how things happen sometimes. We would all sit around, talk about wrestling over some adult beverages, and I knew my stuff, and they're like, we got to get you involved. Well, one time I was up in LA and got a call, and they're like, the play-by-play guy's sick, he's not going to make it. It was Doc Marley at the time. He's no longer with us, but it was a huge show. So at the time, UPW was a West Coast developmental territory for WWF. So on this show was Samoa Joe and Tommy Dreamer was one of the matches. Victoria was just about to go to WWF at the time again, and she wrestled Molly Holly on the show. And the main event was Edge and Christian against Frankie Kazarian and Nova.
So was this about 2001-ish?
This was, yes. Yeah, okay. Right around 2001. So that was my first show. I mean, just talk about a baptism by fire.
Yeah, wow.
And it just kind of rolled from there. And then opportunities came, and I kept working at it and got better. Got a lot of opportunities through Rick. He branched out and started a MMA company called Valor Fighting. So that was what allowed me to kind of branch out and call other combat sports. And that got me an opportunity with Elite XC, which was on CBS at the time. I was calling the undercard fights for them. And then Mauro Ranallo and Goldberg were like the main team. So I got to I met Mauro back then. So, I mean, it just started to snowball. But I met Dave Marquez back then too, because he was doing some stuff with Rick in those early 2000s years. And that's where I first met Dave, and then ended up working with Dave when he had the LA dojo and was doing New Japan Fighting Spirit, Tokon USA, which was a show that they were trying to get going. And then I was there to call the earliest form of championship wrestling from Hollywood too.
That's super cool. He has such an interesting story. I'd love to talk to him sometime too. And I think that the fact that it snowballed so quickly is very cool. And it seems like it's such a small world with broadcasters. You're talking about Mauro Ranallo, and then we talked earlier about the people, you've worked with that just interviewed on this channel, this small channel already, and it does seem like there's such a small world where you're all kind of just 1 or 2 degrees of separation at most.
No doubt. Yeah, absolutely.
So at this point, we're probably getting into, I think the dojo was the early to mid 2000s, roughly.
Yeah.
Is that about right time period?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Nakamura was there. Samoa Joe was there at the time. Maccabi, Toro Yano. So, it was an interesting show. CM Punk was on the commentary team with me. It was just like, it was pretty wild looking back at it now. Hindsight's always 2020. But then Dave, really wanted to launch championship wrestling from Hollywood, and originally worked with Kevin Kleinrock, who was with Big Vision Entertainment at the time. And now Kevin's doing, these big lucha shows and has all kinds of lucha licensing and merchandising and stuff. So he stayed in the business just in more of a niche. But so we were originally at Columbia Square Studios in LA and did this big taping. And we were supposed to be, I think, on either KCAL 9 or Channel 5, both which were decently sized stations out here at the time. And then for whatever reason, I think things just kind of fell through, or one of them like lost their funding or shifted gears. So it kind of got tabled. But I mean, at the time, those initial tapings, I mean, it was, Scrap Iron Adam Pearce, um, who obviously fans would know Adam now as, the authority figure and on-screen character, and works very hard behind the scenes too, by the way,
Mhm.
at WWE. But back then, he was the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion, and uh, but yeah, Brian Danielson was at those early tapings, the Young Bucks. I mean, it was pretty star studded.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely stacked with talent. And Adam Pearce, I'm glad you brought him up because he's a name who's been coming up a lot, and seems like everybody has nothing but good things to say about him. Uh, I loved his mic work, and then his rivalry Colt Cabana. This is further down the road, probably 2010, 11, in that time frame, something like that. Incredible. I thought their rivalry was great. What were your experiences like with him? How much did you get to know him outside of just calling his matches, and your overall experiences?
Yeah, I got to know Adam really well, and I love Adam. I have so much respect for Adam, and I'm so happy for him and his success now. Outside of in ring competition. But I mean, he was a wrestler's wrestler and a great pro and a great mind, and could do everything. Could do so much did so much behind the scenes. Could produce, help talent with their promos. I mean, he was a great promo. He was a great, for my money, was just a great heel champion as the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion, and really carried that promotion and I think, helped keep it alive during those tumultuous times at times. Um, because it was a weird period for the NWA. There was the whole time when they were involved with TNA, obviously, and the world title was on Impact, or their weekly pay-per-views, eventually Impact, and then pulled off of that, and then we had the world title on our program. But Adam was just always a constant. Um, he was great, and yes, that feud with Cabana was great stuff. And I was on the call. It was 2011. I think it was March 2011 when Cabana defeated Pierce for the world title, and that was in LA. And it was a great match and a great atmosphere. Excalibur was actually on commentary with me,
Oh, there you go.
and it was, yeah, that's one of my favorite matches of all time. And there was a funny bit where Cabana had told the crowd in like a promo, if I win the title, drinks are on me. And then they had a guy come out dressed as a milkman, and he had a big case, and was passing out cartons of like milk and chocolate milk, and that was the drinks, the
That's
party
hilarious.
to party with. And that was, so it was perfect. And of course, that spawned into the whole 7 levels of hate and
Yeah.
matches, and the documentary. But then again, the NWA and controversy kind of marred the end of that as well. But I mean, they had a great rivalry. And then I saw that Adam just recently posted it, that when he did finally leave those boots in the ring, that match was also at Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, and it was fitting that he wrestled Colt Cabana one last time. Cabana countered and got him, with a roll up, and pinned him. Adam left the boots in the ring, and that was it. So the fact that I got to be on so many on the call for so many of Adam's kind of historic matches means a lot to me. Looking back, I was there when he lost the title. I was there for his last match. When they were going to put out the DVD series of the 7 levels of hate, I went in the studio and got to call the cage match from Australia. So, and then we ended up reuniting at Impact. Adam was one of the guys that was brought in for the gut check,
Oh, right. Yep.
and so got to hang out with Adam backstage at Impact when I was there calling play-by-play. Called his match. Got to party with him after, and had to feel that the next morning. But that was cool. That was actually, yeah, really a really cool little reunion with
Yeah.
Adam at Impact.
That's super cool. And you brought up NWA controversy, and they've had another controversy recently with Nick Aldis, and he's another phenomenal wrestler. And a lot of people look at him as a real throwback NWA champion. And to me, Adam Pearce also represented that, just in the decade prior, where he was a throwback in the modern era, where you could see in Adam Pearce in a Ric Flair era, but he was bringing it to a new generation. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a lot of respect for Nick as well.
Definitely.
And I respect what Billy Corgan's is attempted to do with the NWA, and it really was on fire with power going. The pandemic really, hurt
Hurt a lot of people in
their
wrestling.
momentum, hurt a lot of people, but definitely killed a lot of their momentum. So I don't wish ill on anybody, and I've got a lot of friends that work there, and I'm all for opportunity as much as possible for everybody. So I wish them nothing but the best. But I don't know the real details of what went
Hmm.
on with Nick there, but I do feel that he carried himself well as the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. I got to call several of his matches. I called his match. Cabana keeps coming up, but he wrestled Cole Cabana in China um, on a special for the United Wrestling Network, and I
That's really cool.
called that with Joe Galley, um, and worked with Nick at Impact as well. It was around that time where he and Samoa Joe were teaming, and then there was Impact versus Aces and Eights and all that was going on when I was there. So I knew Nick from Impact and was really happy anytime I had an opportunity to work with him um, at Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And I know Nick was pushing for me too to have more opportunity with the NWA, but Galley was there, ended up being the guy for that, and he's doing a great job and wears a lot of hats.
Yeah, and Nick, I'm sure he'll do great. Hopefully, the NWA does great as well. Everybody will do well. It is interesting.
I mean, Nick just got to mix it up with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, so
Yeah, that's so cool. Such
yeah,
a cool moment.
very cool. And I'm sure yeah, he's a solid guy and a great talent and professional, and the right opportunity will come along for him. I have no doubt.
Also, just on a side note, talk about the level of talent that comes out of commentary from the Southern California area between yourself, Joe Galley, Johnny LaQuaso. Like, just when you put it into perspective about how much good commentary is coming from that one area, and I guess Dave Marquez has a lot to do with that. But
Yeah, well, and I mean, if he does, and then but Excalibur, called PWG
yeah,
forever. So I mean, he basically got his start out here as well. But yeah, in terms of like United Wrestling Network specifically, I think again it just goes back to it's the best kind of form of television training you can get. It's not just do whatever you want. It is a heavily and well produced program with real formats and real times, and a producer counting you into commercial breaks and counting you into packages and all the things you're going to have to do on a grand scale. And yeah, Joe came in. I left United Wrestling Network for a while to pursue Paragon because they were throwing. I had recently Impact. I went back to Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, which was like the week after I left Impact. I was calling a show with it was Peter Avalon and Ray Rosas against the Rock Nest Monsters in a cage, and it was like I never missed a beat. So
mhm.
United Wrestling Network's always been my home, but Paragon offered you know good money and an opportunity, and I took it, and it didn't it was fun while it lasted, and I got to work with some great friends again. D'Lo Brown was working behind the scenes there, a lot of stuff like that, great talent. Jesse Sorensen, who I knew from Impact, who I was so happy to see back from neck injury at the time in wrestling on Paragon. But it was just a period of time. But Joe was brought in. Joe was a great newscaster, as I'm sure from interviewing him, and had trained to wrestle, and was kind of the heir apparent with me stepping away. And and did a great job. And Johnny LaQuasto, who worked a lot with Joe during that period that I was gone, they were a great team. And then it was great to come back, and the three of us worked together several times. And then when we did Primetime Live, Joe Galley was there for the first couple episodes of that. So I mean, I love those guys. I love working with them. There's no ego there. We're all just in trying to put over the stories and put over the talent. And it's not about us. And LaQuasto and Galley both, are students of the game and love it and do their homework. And so I've got a lot of respect for those guys. But yeah, I think it really is, though, a testament to the fact that this is the real deal. And it is, it's kind of often lost, but I mean, United Wrestling Network is in every bit a national promotion, and Dave doesn't always advertise it. But I mean, if you add up the numbers from all the various channels we're on, we're very competitive in terms of viewership with some of the larger companies. So but it's it's incredible on the job training. It really is.
Definitely. And I do want to dive more into Paragon later, because that whole thing fascinated me. And I'm not sure how much behind the scenes you knew, but I would definitely like to hear more about it. But I do want to talk about something that I find very interesting. CMT had a special series called Hulk Hogan Celebrity Championship Wrestling, which was a reality show that was kind of like Tough Enough, but where you had, let me check, 10 celebrities, such as Todd Bridges, Dustin Diamond, Frank Stallone, Dennis Rodman, and they were training to become a professional wrestler, and there was like an elimination each week. How did you get involved in this? How did you hear about it? How did that come about? Because I'm very intrigued by it.
Yeah, it came full circle through Rick Bassman. Actually, he was helping out with he was helping out with some of the details production wise, and some of the trainers that were going to be working with the celebrities. And so Eric Bischoff was going to be coming by Ultimate Pro Wrestling's school, which at the time was in El Segundo, up there near the LA area. So Rick said, "Hey, you should come in. We're going to have the guys that were prospect trainers, do a couple quick matches for Bischoff and Hervey. And why don't you come and like ring announce it, or do some stand-up interviews and whatever, and get seen." So I did, and I got the the gig through that. So I was the on-screen ring announcer for that show when they would finally have the competition days, and they would be putting on the matches to be judged by Hogan and Bischoff and Jimmy Hart. And then, but I was on set behind the scenes every day too, just taking notes and production notes and just working behind the scenes as well.
That's very cool. How hands-on were you working? Like, what were your interactions with, Hulk Hogan? Did you have much? Because obviously, there's a lot of people working on the show, so I'm not sure how much interaction you would have had at this point.
Yeah, I didn't have a ton of interaction with Hulk on that, but I would later on with other things. But Hulk was always super nice to me. Eric was great. And I know sometimes he has a reputation, but I mean, he could have not ever been nicer to me, and always really gave me some great opportunities that we can go into more. But it was fun. I remember one story that this kind of interesting story. So it was weird because you had television people and wrestling people together, right? And so I would look at some of the scripting for like what my verbiage was going to be as a ring announcer, and I'm like this isn't how it is, it doesn't it's not written right, it doesn't sound right. It was like just really weird, but it was just like TV people writing what they thought it would be. So one episode they had these comedians come in to work. It was going to be a promo episode, but the comedians got in there with the celebrities and were trying to get them to like just take cheap shots and dig on each other, but in their real life personas, not as the characters they were, coming up with on the show. And it really turned ugly quick. And they just weren't having it, and they were threatening to like walk off set. And I mean, production stopped down, and I'm in the control room watching this, and I'm like, that's not what it's about. It's about selling tickets, about selling pay-per-views. It's not. It's about putting over the event and putting over your opponent, but putting yourself over a little bit more, and all those things you hear about. Cutting promo, cutting a good promo. So I was telling one of the producers that, and they got Eric on the phone. Eric comes in, and I'm talking to him, and he's like, "Good, go to wardrobe. You're doing the segment." And then, so I mean,
Wow.
it was weird. So I just got thrown in the mix and basically laid out what a promo is all about. And it's it's marketing, it's push, it's being in character, it's being larger than life. It's so that people want to see this. And then I'm like, and you better be ready because both teams are gonna have to cut promos or whatever. And so saved the segment, like saved the day of filming, because I don't know what they were gonna do otherwise. And did a bad Hogan impression at one point. But this was cool. So when I watched the final edit, I was just like, as an example, Hulk would do this and do that, and did like a Hogan promo. And then in editing, there was these big banner of Hulk, right? And they panned the camera up to Hulk and put like a glimmer in his eye after I cut the promo. Like as a lifelong Hulkamaniac, that was like the greatest compliment. Oh, I'm a glimmer in the Hulkster's eye, And so when I watched that episode back and saw that, I was just proud of the fact that I thought on my feet and was able to help kind of save the day. And but B, that the editor doing that was pretty cool.
It's just such a cool experience in general, because you did bring up, it was very full circle, right? You were a Hulkamaniac. He was one of the people who you were first hooked on as a kid, and here you are 20 years later, and now you're working with him. That's very cool. And probably
when I brought them out, right? So I would introduce and your judges, and bring out Eric, bring out Jimmy Hart, and then did the big, the one, the only, the immortal, and just like channeled the Fink, and introed Hulk, and he's posing, and then as I introduce him, he's sitting there doing this with the mustache, and I'm like looking across, I'm in the ring and looking at him, and he's just sitting there doing his thing. I'm like, this is just bonkers, this is crazy. Like 7-year-old, 8-year-old me would be just absolutely losing his mind right now, and I was still losing my mind with that opportunity. But yeah, it came full circle and it was really cool.
And it's so cool you can have that perspective, because sometimes it's nice to hear people let their, inner fanboys still come out from time to time. You still have to be professional and all that, but the fact that you can appreciate the moment is very cool.
Yeah.
Were you a WCW guy very much? Because that's another thing that's kind of full circle to a lesser degree. Eric Bischoff, he was a commentator for WCW. I think personally he was an underrated commentator. I enjoyed his work for how he directed the show. But, and here you are again, 12 years later from when he was on Nitro, and you're dealing with a guy who was one of the most seen commentators of the last 15 years at that point.
Yeah, and Eric was always very complimentary of my commentary, which I did appreciate him as a commentator, and I was a fan of WCW, and even going back, like I remember, I want to say WrestleMania 4 ran the same day as Clash of the Champions, when it was Sting and Ric Flair that like went the distance.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say WrestleMania 4 was on HBO or Showtime or once that year. And then it was, by WrestleMania 5, it was just like full scale pay-per-view. But I didn't see WrestleMania 4 live, but Clash of the Champions was on, and that really opened my eyes to to their style and kind of the work rate that product had versus WWF at the time. But then during the Monday Night Wars, man, I mean, I was like in the thick of it. It was the time like when I was in college, and so Monday nights, man, you get done with practice and get done with class, and that was the place to be, is going back and forth and watching Raw and Nitro. And I was a big fan. I was a huge fan of WCW. I really liked the all the international talent that they were bringing in, with the luchadors and guys from Japan and the cruiserweights and I thought it was cool. And then I got hooked on, the whole NWO storyline. And then on the flip side, obviously, I think that really was a catalyst for the Attitude Era. And then it was just everything kicked into full gear. And it was appointment viewing, man. It was must see TV every Monday night for sure.
Having your own little nitro parties.
Dude, for sure. Yeah. I wish they had come to our place at SC like they did a couple times when they would, they'd go to the parties and then all of a sudden the hardcore match would like break out in the dorm or whatever, or the frat house. But because I don't Club La Vila and Spring Break, I don't think had anything on some of the parties. I lived with a bunch of the guys from the football team, and it was a good time to say the least. But no, I was totally invested in both.
Overall, though, what were your impressions of the show, of the concept of the show, and did you have any, like, how much dealings did you have with the celebrities themselves? Did you have any interesting interactions with them?
Yeah, a lot. We were on set together all day, and I would watch some of because I'd be sitting there taking notes and for editing purposes and stuff, and so I'd be watching the training sessions. And I mean, looking back, I'm really amazed that show, like, that we pulled it off. I mean, the celebrities had to invest and learn how to work at least enough to put on a passable match, and I think some of the stuff was really a lot of fun. I mean, I remember looking back, Dustin Diamond and Danny Bonaducci had like a Falls Count Anywhere match that was just a blast. It was super fun. They like fought through the other sets. Bonaducci got thrown through a wall at one point. It was super entertaining. Dustin Diamond was a big fan, so he really tried to be, that Hollywood like heel character, and it was a good time. And Todd Bridges had a gymnastics background, and I mean, I'm telling you, if you go back and watch some of this, he was doing handspring elbows in the corner. He did like a sunset flip off the second rope, and I mean, his stuff really looked good. Like, it was crisp. Would do like a big dives to the outside. I mean, he was like fearless out there, and athletically was really, really impressive, and then Butterbean was a big dude. So when he would, land a splash, like it really would resonate. Like it was, the guys worked hard. I always part of me always kind of questioned, I understand why Rodman was there, but I mean, Rodman had worked pay-per-view matches in WCW. So it just didn't quite seem fair.
Had a bit of an edge over.
No, yeah, no doubt. And he was he was a member of the NWO, and the Hulkster is one of the judges. So
interesting.
And Eric Bischoff's one of the judges, who certainly benefited from ratings from having Rodman in WCW in the day and leaving a playoff game and going straight there. So, but it was,
what a time.
I thought it was a lot of fun, and the celebrities worked hard. And it was a lot of fun to work on, because then you had, Hulk was there, you had Brutus Beefcake was there, Brian Knobs, Jimmy Hart, Eric. It was a blast, and other people would always pop in. Rob Van Dam was there at one point.
I think Goldberg at one point too.
Goldberg came through. So it was. I mean, God, I was just every day like, I can't believe I'm getting paid for this, but it was fun, and it was discussed to come back for follow-up seasons, but it just sounds like they just couldn't agree on I think the budget was going to be cut some and stuff, and both sides just couldn't agree. But man, I was bummed, because I would have loved to seen who else would have come out of the woodwork. But I thought the celebrities that were on it really worked hard, and for the most part did a really good job.
Any interesting Brian Knobbs stories? Because he's a character and a half.
He's a character. He would just, I mean, it was funny because you would see like just randomly, um, you'd see Brian Knobs like on the golf cart just, and we were just in this big warehouse. It was like an industrial that they built the different sets. They built a gym set, an arena set. Like it was really cool. But I mean, it was just a big space. And randomly, I just remember one day seeing Brian Knobs just driving the golf cart around, just drove over to catering to grab a bag of ice and drove off. And I'm sure he's, going to ice something down, some adult beverages. But, just like, I mean, it was like, how, what was it? WrestleMania 17, where it was like, it was what Big Show, Kane, and Raven hardcore match, and they're driving the go karts around.
Yeah.
Looked like some out of like it's like some crazed version of Mario Kart. So just seeing like Brian Knobs driving around in a golf cart and grabbing ice and like, hey, how's it going? And driving off. It was like I was just normal for that set, which was fun.
And that's what makes it so surreal, because that's normal. But if you even thought 10 years prior, like, I'm going to see Brian Knobs driving around in a golf cart at a Hulkamania reality TV show, it's crazy.
Right. Yeah. It was a good time.
So I'm guessing this is what led you into the Hulkamania tour in Australia. And for those who don't know, it was called Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin Tour, which I believe is where Ric Flair came out of retirement. And he battled Hulk Hogan. It was 4 dates. I think it was a 4-date tour, and it was a pretty big deal. I remember at the time. So how did you get? Who was in contact with you? What was the pitch? Yeah. What did you know?
So that was and it was, again, it's just when you keep working and just getting relationships in the business and opportunities come. And I had worked with Rikishi on a couple tours one was in South Africa. All right. And this was hilarious because they just had a random DJ doing music. And I'll never forget, there was a lot of good talent. Like Kevin Nash was on that tour, Test, the Steiner brothers. And so the Powers of Pain, so Warlord and Barbarian, are coming out for a match. And I think the DJ was given, back then it was like they still had CDs and stuff, was given, the run of the show and the music. And I don't know what happened to it, but I am not kidding you when I say that the Powers of Pain were brought out to Barbie Girl. I'm a Barbie Girl in a Barbie room. Funniest shit ever. God. And then they get in the ring, and I look over, and Warlord just looks at me. He's got the black and blue face paint, and he just goes, "This is brutal." I'll never forget it. And then Nathan Jones was on the tour, and he was brought out to the Bee Gees jive talking.
Wow.
A 7 foot tall Australian, right? Jive talking. Yeah,
just screams intensity.
It was something. But okay, so anyway, the reason I bring up Rikishi is so he's wrestling. I think I want to say Brian Christopher was there, and but at the end he's gonna do the dance. And I was ring announcing, and the guy wasn't hit. So I had got on the mic, and I'm like, cut them, because he's just playing the music. Now this time they actually was playing Rikishi's music, but then Rikishi got in the ring to do the dance post-match, and I got on the mic. I'm like, cut the music. Rikishi did his thing. I'm like, hit the music. So I'm giving audio cues over the mic, and then the guy does it, and Rikishi does the dance. And I, afterwards there were some lounge, and Black Pearl Reno Anawai comes up and who's works with Rikishi and trains people at his school and his family, obviously the Samoan dynasty. And he's like, "Hey, Keish wants to talk to you." And Keish was like, "Thanks for saving me out there." So I ended up having a really good relationship with those guys. They were working to book some of the talent for the Hulkamania tour. So I had that going, and as well as, Eric Bischoff and Hulk, who were heavily involved. So It had been a couple years since Celebrity Championship Wrestling, but it was it was good to work with those guys again.
Did they talk much about what the expectations were for the event or for this tour? Or was it more just, hey, we have these days if you can come and fulfill them? Or were they saying, this is something that's going to be big? Like, were they really selling you on it and diving into their plans
I
for it?
mean,
Or,
I don't know how much you have to sell somebody on
yeah,
Hogan Flair and Flair coming out of retirement after his match with Shawn. Like, I mean,
absolutely.
it was pretty big. And for me, just I wore a lot of hats on that. So I was typing up the formats for the shows and timing stuff out. I was writing lighting cues and video stuff just to send to production out there ahead of time so they could get the right colored lighting and stuff for the different talent for the intros. Talking about pyro, all these things. And then once we got like boots on the ground, I got to do backstage interviews, stand-ups with both Hulk and Flair, which, I mean, let me tell you, trying to like keep a straight face doing that
Oh,
was
yeah.
difficult, especially like Flair at the end like turned to me, he's like, woo, and I like sold it, and Hulk at the end, I mean, Hulk was playing the hits, dude. He did, God created the heavens and the earth and a pair of 24-inch pythons, brother. And he just was going on and doing all the lines. And I'm standing there. And then at the end, he's like, so you know what, little dude? And he like pokes me in the chest. There's only one thing left to say, what you gonna do? And I mean, just to not crack was tough, man. Cause yeah, that if there was ever a time to fanboy out for me,
Yeah.
it was that. And he just getting to kind of play the Mean Gene role. And of course, he walks in flexing the tricep, and then right in front of my face, the python, and that was a blast. And then just getting to call Hogan Flair match on the last show, which was the one that was really like filmed for television. It was Eric. It was like a revolving door of talent that would do color, but Eric Bischoff sat down and did color for Hogan Flair, and there were some great matches on that tour, and one that and again, it just, I think whatever happened, and there was money issues, and I don't like, there were some big numbers at those shows. There's 10,000 plus at a couple, and I don't know what the makeup of that was, if it was papered at all or what, but I mean, the people were there, they were into it, they were, in the red and yellow, and it was a good time. But I think again, like just between and Eric would obviously know way more from the business standpoint, but between the Australian promoter and entertainment promoter and them and money and whatever and rights, for whatever reason, that footage got held up and never saw the light of day. So I called a Hogan Flair match that probably no one thought would ever happen at that point, right? After WrestleMania 24, with Eric Bischoff on commentary with me, and I've never seen it or heard it.
And that's such a shame.
That really hurts. That one hurts.
Oh.
That one hurts, man. But also on that tour, a match that I would love to see get its just due and get released was Umaga. Eki Fatu passed away shortly after the tour, and he wrestled his final match, but it was against Ken Anderson, Mr. Kennedy, call him what you will, but they had a phenomenal match that really stole the show. That was just would have been a great TV or pay-per-view match anywhere. And Eki was just such a good dude and an intense dude, but a loyal, just friend in the business to everybody. Just just protected everybody, and was such a great talent and such a great character and a big part of that Samoan dynasty. It's just, I wish that match, could be seen and be released, because it was something to be proud of for sure.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that, because he's a guy who you don't really hear that much about his personality because everyone talks about how what a great wrestler he was, and
Mm.
he was fantastic. But it's really cool to hear about the person, behind the face paint, behind the athleticism, and that's very cool. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course,
And
of
hopefully,
course.
someday, somehow, this stuff can get released because, I mean, it's a part of history. Like you said, the Ric Flair came out of retirement after WrestleMania 24, which, in my opinion, is arguably the greatest retirement there ever was. It was fantastic with Shawn Michaels. And, we don't need to get into why he did it and, whether it was good or not. But the fact is, it happened. And that's a big part of history because Ric Flair is one of the biggest stars of all time.
Yeah, yes, of course. Of course he is. And recently came out of retirement one last time. So,
Maybe.
it's hard to keep the nature boy down, that's for sure. But it was a great experience. I'll never forget it. And but yes, of course, I would love to see that somehow, some way, someday get released.
Did you
Because I
have
mean
any,
it.
sorry.
Go ahead. No, no.
I was just gonna ask if you had any post-show bar experiences with the Nature Boy.
Yes, yes. In fact, so it was Sydney. It was the final day of the tour, and I thought that we were flying out in the morning, and then it turned out that we weren't going to be flying out until later the next day. So a really good friend of mine, Anthony Rosas, who worked at UPW with me and was a referee on the tour and wrestled all the Hogan Flair matches on that tour. We're like, well, let's go see the sights. Let's go, get a picture at the Opera House and go hang around town a little bit. And so we're walking down into the hotel lobby, and just like hand on the door to leave and go check out downtown Sydney. And hey, where are you going? Get back here! Woo! Get back here! It's probably
Oh no.
9 in the morning and Flair's already at the bar. And so we go over there and sit down and just started drinking with Nate, and he's telling stories. And then throughout the day, just different talent. Eric would come by for a while, Nas would come by, just different talent would come by and cycle in and out. And Flair was just holding court and telling stories and drinking and just being Ric Flair. Every 10 minutes he would get up and strut around the bar a little bit and back to his seat, order some more kamikazes. And yeah, we never made it to the Opera House, but just sat there all day. And then at the end, our shuttle was coming to go to the airport, and we were on different flights and stuff, of course. So, and we're like, well, Rick, what do we owe? He's like, I got it. And then we got on the shuttle to go to the airport. Then Flair got on the shuttle and was like just thanking everybody again for the tour, and it was very heartfelt. And it was cool. But yes, got to drink for a better part of the day with the Nature Boy and hear many a story.
What a moment. And again, let's just look back. Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff, Ric Flair, Brian Ups. Like, you're working with all these people that you grew up watching, and you're getting to drink with them after shows and hang out with them and work closely with them. I think that's just super cool. And the tour itself had so much talent. Nasty Boys. Gangrel, he was a Vampire Warrior. You had Mr.
Yes.
Anderson, Val Venus, who was wrestling as Sean Morley, Brian Christopher, Rikishi, Eugene. Like, there's so much talent on that tour. That had to be a crazy just lineup to be around all them. Because at this point, you've already been with a lot of talented wrestlers throughout. I think at this point, you're probably going almost 10 years in commentary in various forms, but that's still quite the collection.
It was stacked, and it was such a fun collection of characters. Godfather was on it too. It was just like, Rikishi, all those guys. Jimmy Hart, managing the Nasty Boys, like that was cool to get to see that, again in person and call it. So no, it was great. It really was a great experience. And even though it never got released, I know what went down on that tour and how hard I worked on it and how much it meant to me. And so, no one can ever take those memories, but I would be lying if I didn't say that is a tough one to take, that I don't have a copy of that.
I know there was a lot of talk about doing future tours. I think not just in Australia either. I think at one point there was like, oh, we could take this, to do 4 big shows in the UK. We could take this to do 4 big shows here and there. Obviously, that never materialized. Did they talk to you much about it? Because you were working the production end, which I think is very cool. So were you in the loop at all on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, somewhat, and even back to like Celebrity Championship Wrestling, they were talking about doing some marketing events and shows, and having the celebrities do little shows and then supplement them with other matches, and do some like kind of touring with that too. Um, but yeah, no, I remember after the final show of the Australian tour, Hulk and Eric waved me over, and just again, I had done a lot on that tour. Um, and they both, Hulk was like, "We want you on our team, brother." And it took kind of a few more years for that to materialize again. But I mean, Eric was absolutely a driving force in getting me, my opportunity with Impact.
You've had a lot of really cool, unique projects that I hope will see the light of day. Like, I don't even know if if Hulk Hogan Celebrity Championship Wrestling is streaming anywhere at this point. It's that kind of stuff that I would love to, even if it's just on YouTube. Like, I hope it's out there somewhere.
Yeah, no, for sure. I
Speaking of
mean, I
projects like that, oh, sorry.
no,
Sure.
yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I recorded it back in the day and have, just like DVD copies of it. Um, just to have. One of these days I'll have to break them out. But yeah, no, that show was a blast to work on. It was a lot of fun, and I think I hear it a lot. When I am interviewed for stuff like this, where people are like, I really love that show. I go, me too. Wish you would have continued, but
Yeah. I think it's cool that you saved it too. That way, at least if nothing else, you have it, and especially, today almost everything's online. And I'm sure if you dove deep enough, you could probably find it somewhere, but it would just be nice if it was made available.
yeah, come on, Viacom, just do something with it for goodness sakes.
So there's 2 other projects where one I'm pretty sure you didn't have any part of, one I'm not completely certain, but just ask real quick. Two, they were Southern California projects, and I think Kevin Kleinrock was involved with both. Lucha Libre USA and
Mhm.
Wrestling Society X. Were you involved at all with either of those projects? And if not, were they at least on your radar? I'm sure they were on your radar, but
I auditioned for Wrestling Society X, and with Lucha, I did work with Kevin for a while. He had a series called Viva La Lucha,
mhm.
that was like a pay-per-view series and then a DVD series, because Kevin was big in that DVD industry for a while when it was first really blowing up with Big Vision Entertainment. And so Ryan Katz, who recently returned to NXT and WWE again as a producer, um, I had worked with him on a couple things previously. And then he ended up being part of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood too, as a manager, as GQ Money, and he was great, very entertaining. But he and I would call some of the Lucha pay-per-views and posts together. So I did work with Kevin on that. I didn't end up working on Wrestling Society X. Chris Kloss, who's a great friend of mine, did XPW and then did Wrestling Society X. But David Marquez was involved in production on that, and with the Piranha Tank death matches and all the different stuff that they tried to pull up. So Marquez definitely has some funny stories of working on the set.
I can't even imagine. And it was, it didn't work out, but what a cool opportunity. And it did have a lot of interesting talent there. And hey, a young Seth Rollins, long before he was with even Ring of Honor, he got his first real major exposure on that show. So it's pretty cool. A lot of cool, interesting short-term projects there.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can go back and kind of see, as this is a very Dave Marquez verbiage, but people's baby pictures, you know. He always says, we've got everybody's baby pictures of some of their first things that they did. It's really fun to look back at those, and you see a little glimpse of some of the stuff that's to come years down the line. So yeah, you're right. Seth Rollins was part of that, and it's crazy.
It's very cool. So after the Hulkamania tour, were you doing championship wrestling at this point regularly throughout, or were you in and out? Because right before you start with TNA, I know you said you left them, but at that point, were you working with David Marquez regularly, or was it kind of an in and out thing with all these different projects?
Yeah, no, I was with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood um, prior. So I think we really kind of relaunched in 2009, and that was we started taping at the Galaxy Theater, which was interesting too because that's where UPW used to run
Mhm.
back when John Cena started there as the prototype. Kazarian was there, Christopher Daniels, Brian Kendrick, a lot of great talent came through UPW. So to be back at the Galaxy when we first restarted Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, and this is in Orange County, but Hollywood, close
Yeah.
enough. And for KDOC, that it was cool to be back in that venue that had a lot of history. Um, but yeah, it kind of branched from there. So I was with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood during that whole period, and then into the kind of Pearson Cabana. That was in 2011, and still working on other projects too, like MMA and this and that. And then I started with TNA towards the end of 2012. So then I took a break from um, Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, just based on being on TV with Impact every week and calling their TV and pay-per-views. And then when I finished my run with them, like I said, it was like the next week I was back on Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And then I want to say, so that was 2013. I want to say it was around 2015, 14, 15 that Paragon came around. So I left again to do that, and then came back.
It's cool that David Marquez. He seems like, and I don't know him. Like I said, I hope to interview him in the future. He's a nice guy. I've only had a brief conversation with him, but he seemed great. He seems like he's the type of guy who's like, there's a bigger opportunity, take it, and what if it's over, if it doesn't work, if it does work, and you want to come back, if we have a role for you, you're more than welcome back.
For sure. No, they always welcome me back, and I was always just so happy to always have a home there. But no, Dave wants this to be a launch pad for talent. He wants that program that he prides himself on, as Joe Galley said, as Johnny LaQuaso said, as I've echoed, that it's about making people marketable and TV ready.
Mhm.
And so yeah, no, he has no ego when it comes to people like leaving to take on quote unquote bigger opportunities. In fact, he takes that as a badge of honor because it means that, and a lot of the people that move on from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, they're not somebody that needs to spend a lot of time in a performance center for say, or developmental to get polished, because they're turnkey, they're ready to go.
Yeah, they know how to work cameras. It's very cool. So was your Impact and TNA debut? I believe they were still TNA Wrestling at the time, and the show was Impact. I could be wrong on that.
That's
Was
correct.
was your connection to that Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan?
Yeah, it was. And then Eric, um, yeah, Eric really was one to push for it. And then I just kind of stayed in touch and would reach out here and there. And then Eric was the one that really kind of dialed me in on what he wanted from like a reel for me to send. And he knew I had called MMA, and he wanted some of that in there too, just because they just wanted to kind of change things up a little bit. And so I remember just kind of one time reaching out one more time, like, hey, just seeing if you got anything. He's like, can you be in Orlando this Thursday? I was like, sure.
Wow. Okay.
So so ended up coming out, and I remember got in, and went to the production meeting. And I remember Eric Hulk was in there, Eric. It was kind of that final script meeting. And he's like, "Hey, everybody, if you don't know him, this is Todd Keneley. He's calling the first hour with JB." So, like, I thought I had auditioned with WWE in the past, right? I thought I was getting brought in just to get seen and to audition. And I get there and like, "Oh, yeah, you're calling the first hour with JB." So then,
Wow.
my first meeting with Jeremy Borash, and we sat down and kind of did some just kind of put a match on his laptop to just call it to try and get some timing. And then we were live that night for Impact. I remember it was shortly after Bound for Glory, 2012, and the first match we did like an on camera open, the whole bit, um, and it was Rob Van Dam, who had just defeated Zema Ion for the X Division title, defending the title in a rematch. And I mean, it was as live as can be, and that was that. And then we did a whole thing where then after, kind of like the old Nitro team would do, where they would, after the first hour, they'd swap out and you'd have a second team. I think Eric just wanted to try that again to kind of freshen things up, and it was Eric and Bruce Pritchard too. I think Eric had told Bruce about me, and then Bruce worked with me too on getting me in there. But so it called the first hour, and I think one of the matches was Samoa Joe, Rob Terry. I don't remember, but we called the first hour. Then I went backstage, and then was doing some of the like after Impact interviews and stuff, and just met with everybody after, and was getting really good feedback, and didn't really hear anything else. And then the next morning, when I was like, had just gotten to Orlando Airport to go home, I got an email from Bob Ryder saying, "Hey, great job. Welcome to the family. Here's your travel for next week."
Wow.
So
That's so cool.
that's just kind of how that all went down. But after 3 trips to Stanford and never them just never pulling the trigger and signing me, and partially due to me, because I mean that's like your dream job, right? That was everything. I wanted to get to WWE as an announcer. When I got brought back there and I did some stand-ups in the studio, I just froze up. I mean, I have to admit it. I froze up. I was shaky. I was just like deer in the headlights. And then I went and like called matches with Michael Cole, and then my first audition was with Taz, oddly enough, which I worked with him obviously in Impact.
Do you
And
remember roughly what years these were?
that was that would have been like that was like 2003.
Okay.
And then the last time I went out there, last time I was brought out was 2009. So when I first went out, I was super green still, but worked with Taz, did stand-ups, everything went well. It was backstage at a SmackDown. They just put matches to a monitor. Kevin Dunn was in the truck feeding the stuff. He was in our ear counting us down for like replays and stuff. And I felt like I knocked it out of the park. Michael Cole and Taz both told me to like watch the rest of the show on the headsets just backstage, and so I could hear just the chatter producer talk. And I felt like, dude, okay, I got this. And a few weeks later, I got the call to go back, and I'm like, I already auditioned, so I'm like, I'm going back there to sign on the dotted line, daddy. But no, they put me in the studio, and the big studio cam came down, and the big red light came on, and I froze up, and but then did commentary and got comfortable again, and then they flew me back out to audition for like a live event, like host position at one point, and that was like just a few months after. And then in 2009, right before doing the Hulkamania tour, I got taken out there. And this time I called matches with Joey Styles, with John Gaburek, big, um, overseeing the audition. And I got to admit, I froze up on the stand-ups again at first, but then had some really good ones, and then felt really comfortable on commentary. And afterwards, I didn't get signed, but it was a bit of a monkey off the back because I met with John Gaburek in his office after, and he's like, well, how do you, honestly, how do you think you did? And I said, well, I don't know why this is like happening to me again here, but I like froze up on the stand-ups, but then got more comfortable and then felt good, felt pretty good about the commentary. And he, really put me over on commentary and said, what you did on commentary is phenomenal. We bring people in from all walks of broadcasting, sportscasters that think they have to call every single move. They don't know how to tell the story, or they're monotone, or they're always up here and there's no ebb and flow. And you knew how to tell the story and follow the match. And I think he said, like, what you did on commentary was phenomenal. And I'm like, so that went a long way to help me, like, okay, I feel pretty good about myself now. I didn't, so I guess they were going to bring it down to, like, they had 10 people, then they were going to narrow it down to 3. And like a few months later, I got a call and they're like, congratulations, you made the final 3. But unfortunately, they're just deciding to go in a different direction or something. And it was like, and that was the end of it, with them. But then it was the Hulkamania tour and wearing so many hats. And then it was Impact, and that going on live on Impact with JB and being on camera and then calling those matches live, having just met JB earlier that day. Like, I mean, if there was a time to be nervous, that would have been the time, not just being in a studio where I'm just trying out. So that too, like making that debut on Impact and then sticking, and I was really happy with my work at Impact. I thought, had some great opportunities, had some great calls, and got to call AJ Styles matches, Kurt Angle matches, Sting matches. Hogan was there on camera as the general manager. I got to do some cool stuff and do it at that level, live television, live pay-per-view. So that really kind of shook that confidence issue that I kind of got from those several WWE tryouts by seemingly coming so close and then just not sealing the deal. It was then that I knew, hey, I can do it, at that level.
Was Big working there in TNA when you were? Because I know he eventually started working for TNA. Was he working there when you were there?
No, we just missed each other.
Shit's passed in the night.
I know. Yep, exactly. Yeah.
What were your experiences working with Bruce Pritchard? Because he's another guy who's, he's controversial, extremely entertaining. He has an incredible podcast. What did you work with him much? Did he produce you much?
Yeah.
What was it like working with him?
I did, and again, he was a big part of all those, creative meetings when we're kind of finalizing the format for the show. So I sat in on all those as the entire commentary team did. But in terms of producing us, honestly, very little. So, you'd always heard the stories of WWE just constantly having people in your ear and feeding you and whatever, and kind of molding your commentary style. I mean, that wasn't the case like when I tried out for WWE, but I mean, obviously had I signed, maybe that would have been the case. But in TNA, just never experienced that. I mean, we had Keith Mitchell would be in our ear, director, just to count us again into like breaks and replays and packages and all those things, and give just a heads up. And then Bruce would come on here or there, just with just nuances of story or little thing. Make sure you guys hit this, and whatever. But I didn't have people feeding me lines. I didn't have people telling me what to say. I didn't have people riding me the broadcast. They didn't at all. I mean, I'm there with 2 experienced vets too in Tenay and Taz. And so we were really left to our own devices outside of just like the nuts and bolts of timing and hitting our marks for TV.
I could talk to you about this for a while, and you've been very generous with your time. So I'll only ask a few more questions before we wrap it up. But I do appreciate it because, I find it fascinating. You're just thinking about working with JB, working with Taz, working with Mike Tenay. I feel like you could talk about that for a while and break down working with every single one. But I know, after this, as we mentioned, you moved on to Paragon Pro Wrestling. What did you know about the company? Why do you think it was so short-lived? Because they had big exposure. I mean, again, I'm in New England. It came out and reached out here. So how did you get the deal, and what was your experience like with them?
Yeah, I mean, I knew like the main money behind that, Mark Stuckman, he was a character on Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. He had the West Coast wrestling connection in Portland, and I had gone up there and done some of those shows, as did Championship Wrestling from Hollywood Talent when he and Dave Marquez were on good terms, which they were for quite a while. Stuff went south with their relationship, and but again, they were offering the same, if not more money that I was making at Impact. And I was a single dad, and I mean, it was just impossible to turn down. And I think they threw a lot of money at it, and I think they ran before they could walk. Those first episodes, I mean, they had like a battle royal episode, was I think the first episode to crown a number one contender, and it wasn't the best. But eventually the wrestling and the episodes got really good, and you had guys like Hammerstone on there, and you had guys like Jesse Sorensen that had come back from an injury and was a great story in that respect, and was a really good athlete and good in-ring worker. And then you had some star power, like Gangrel was there. You had good guys working behind the scenes, veteran guys like Sin Bodhi and D'Lo Brown. So it got really good. I just think it kind of fell into that XFL syndrome of the original XFL, where like when it first started, the football wasn't great, but then it got really entertaining, but people weren't watching it.
It was too late by that point.
It was too late. And so I think people watched those first couple episodes and like, this isn't it. And then, but it got so much better. The wrestling got so much better. The production, graphics, everything really were pretty top notch by the time it was too late. And I really just think that was the case.
That's a shame. Because you see go over all these short-lived projects, and some of them had a lot of potential, and some of them were really good. It's just a shame that for whatever reason, they didn't end up working out. Sure.
And then, but it was right back to the United Wrestling Network, thankfully. And now we're, doing great things and survived the pandemic, and even ran during the pandemic. I mean, we continued to film. Obviously, we had to stop down production until it was safe, and we had to follow protocols, and everybody had to be tested. But we did episodes of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood with no live crowd, and then eventually the pay-per-view series Primetime Live, which had some phenomenal matches during the pandemic. NWA was part of it for a good run, so Nick Aldis defended the world title. I mean, we had the television title at the time change hands, and the Pope won that. We had the North American title changed hands, and so the NWA Women's title, Serena Deeb won it from Thunder Rosa on Primetime Live. So it was cool to get to call some NWA action again, and big title changes that then had kind of ramifications elsewhere, because then Serena Deeb took the title onto Dynamite and defended it there, as well as just some of the United Wrestling talent having some great matches on that. So that was a lot of fun, and a unique challenge to call it with no crowd.
I'm glad you brought up the pandemic, because it shows what a pro you are. You have all the transitions done for me, so I don't have to struggle through them. Thank you. But the pandemic was obviously, even putting aside all the many real life issues that come with it, it took its toll on pro wrestling. What was it like for you as a commentator to call matches without a crowd? Is it dramatically different? Because obviously, as a performer, you're feeding off the crowd. When you're a commentator, I know a lot of times you're doing things in post, but you're still normally getting that crowd feedback. What was it like as a commentator dealing with that?
Yeah, and most of the stuff I do, if it's not live, it's live to tape. We don't do a whole lot in post. But it was interesting because you don't you don't have some of those just crutches that as a broadcaster you're used to of, what an atmosphere, you can just feel the energy, listen to this place, they're going bananas, all those things. It's just not there. It's just a cavernous space. And it was a challenge, I think, more for the talent, in-ring talent, than for a broadcaster, because as a broadcaster, you can just dive more into background and information and okay, let's talk strategy and call it almost more like MMA or something, talk technique and strategy and break down every little thing and fill some of the dead air. You're not gonna lay out for "this is awesome" chant, because there's no "this is awesome" chant, right? Um, I mean, some promotions did that and piped it in, right? But we didn't. So you'd fill some of that air, but you would also lay out to let the talent be vocal, and it made the talent had to be more vocal and talk trash and get character over. Plus, the strike with no crowd, dude. Let me tell you, those chops are loud. The strikes really echo. So you'd kind of lay out for some of the strikes, but then just put over the force of the strikes on commentary. So the pacing was just different, but I got used to it, and just like I always found MMA during the pandemic was interesting too, where you could really hear the corners instructions, because you're not having that crowd just bleeding over everything.
Mhm.
So, and you can hear the feet on the canvas. You can hear just all the little sounds. And so instead of like laying out for crowd, it was more laying out just so you didn't miss if the wrestlers are really communicating. Because and like the reason I say it was, I think, more of a challenge for the in-ring talent is a baby face, you can still come out and get on the turnbuckles, for your
Yeah, yeah.
beauty shot, but there's no reaction. And like a comeback, you're not going to have the baby face doing this, and there's nothing there, no matter what you do. So they, I think they had to adjust on the fly more, and just versus there's no grandstanding to the crowd and looking for the reaction. It more just had to be reality based, and it had to be a fight.
That's interesting because there's also the aspect of when people are calling matches and calling spots in the ring and they're talking back and forth, and that's going to become
Yes.
a lot more noticeable. I mean, if you're John Cena, as great as he is, you could hear that on TV with 20,000 people in the crowd, but still, in general, it's normally hidden, and it seems like a lot more difficult to hide that. Is that something you would try to watch out for and try to cover for while you're doing
Yeah, and
commentary?
that's why too. Like if they ever got there tight, we would cover that dead air and we'd be talking on commentary. But and then when we were filming just for Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, we would go live to tape, and then I'm sure our editors probably had some moments where they had to cut around some stuff like that. But we didn't have that luxury when we were live for Primetime Live, and it was no audience. But somehow, the talent just had to work around it and be careful. And to their credit, I don't remember any like just glaring examples of it just being obvious.
All right, before we wrap things up, I'm going to do it's like a word association, name association. You can give, just a sentence. If you want to tell a story, by all means, go ahead and do it. And we'll just cover, a number of topics. It'll be people in the business or, general subject matter. For example, the first one I'm going to start off with PCW Ultra, who I know you've worked for.
Yeah, PCW Ultra, just great international talent. I got to call a great Muda match there. Penta Sarah Mieto, Jacob Fatu. Just, I mean, it was great, and because those shows were just pay-per-view style, where it's 7 matches or so, great matches, not really storyline heavy. It was just got to call some great international talent.
Colt Cabana.
Entertainment,
So
entertainment,
entertaining.
and just fun, good time.
The Rock Ness Monsters, and in general, just Johnny Yuma.
Johnny Yuma, very creative, very hardworking, loving father. But Johnny Yuma was head of creative for a long time at Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, and worked really hard. And I know was applying that craft elsewhere. But again, like, Rock Ness Monsters are so much fun as a team. And now Kevin Martinson is the Heritage Champion at Championship Wrestling, and is doing great things as a single. But Yuma is given a lot creatively to the product over the years.
And potential plug, we might be having an interview with Johnny Yuma in the future. We've talked about it, just trying to work out schedules. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Okay, Ryan Katz, because you talked about him briefly earlier.
Yeah. Another one, super creative, just almost genius, and just great character. And in my working with him, just he's always on. I never saw a solemn, like, listless Ryan Katz. He's always, turned up to 11.
This one might be difficult for you. Favorite match or matches you've called?
Okay. Oof. That is tough, but I will say Pierce Cabana is absolutely up there. Hogan Flair, even though nobody ever saw it. RVD Zima Ion, that Impact debut, because I was able to prove something to myself. And then I would say Kurt Angle, AJ Styles, Slammiversary 2013, because that was my last show with Impact, and to get to call a match with those two was
Absolutely
pretty special. Yeah.
Least favorite match, and if you don't want to bury anybody in particular, or it could just be because of issues that happen. Least favorite match type, maybe a certain kind of match is more difficult to call as an announcer. I don't know.
Okay. Twins. I hate twins. Just had to call the Voros twins, and they were just like, all right, are you, which one's Chris? Which one's Patrick? Oh, I don't know. Take your best guess. All right, which one's starting the match? Oh, I'm not sure. Do you wear an armband? Anywhere wear anything different? And this goes back, my first WWE audition. I didn't know what matches they were going to have me call. Again, they were just going to put some matches to a monitor, and I'm thinking, please not the Basham brothers. Please not the Basham brothers. Second match I called. Doug and Danny, there they are, the Basham brothers. So I was like, oh, God. So, yeah, twins are tough.
Basham tags out to Basham.
There you go. That's what you got to do.
Who's some of your favorite broadcasting partners you've had?
Oh, man, I've had some great ones. I really am enjoying working with James Kincaid. He's one of my primary broadcast partners at Championship Wrestling now. He works with the Golden State Warriors. He does West Coast Pro up in Northern California. He's really kind of come into his own. He started working with us on Primetime Live during the pandemic. And, we just kind of have a shared sensibility. And even though we're kind of two play-by-play guys, we find that we're able to mesh. Johnny LaQuasto goes way back with me to the start of United Wrestling Network. So I've always enjoyed working with him. In that same vein, Stu Stone was a blast to work with as a heel commentator in Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. JB was great, made me feel comfortable getting in at Impact. Working with Eric, when I got to work with Eric, was like a dream come true. And then Tenay and Taz, two guys that I really idolized. I loved Taz's work on SmackDown with Michael Cole. I loved Tenay and WCW, having so knowledgeable about the luchadors and the international talent. And then, of course, his work at TNA. So getting to work with those two was awesome. But yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed being in the booth with so many over the years.
Very, very cool.
And
Yeah, I,
Joe Galley was great because Joe Galley basically was brought in to, um, take my place when I left for Paragon. And then the fact that I got to come back and that Joe and LaQuasto and I all got to work together was cool.
last question, and then we'll get to the plugs. What
Yeah.
does the future look like for Todd Keneley?
I'm loving it. I'm still as passionate about this as I ever was. Again, it's well documented now that I started as a fan. I'm still a fan. I still love watching as much wrestling as I can, and the other disciplines I get to call, boxing and MMA and kickboxing. I think there's nothing like the energy at combat sports live when it comes to the crowd and just the challenge of staying with the action and telling the story and having to switch gears. And I love it. And I'm loving what we're doing with the United Wrestling Network right now. I'm part of a really great MMA promotion called Up Next Fighting. And but if the right door opens, I've got a lot of good friends at AEW. Christopher Daniels there is involved in talent. He and Kazarian, I've been friends with them since my earliest days in the business. I've called matches with Excalibur. I've called matches with Taz. If that door ever opened and the opportunity was right, I would love to do that. And of course, given the opportunity, I would love to finally get that WWE monkey off my back and have the opportunity there as well, because it was tough getting so close and then never being able to fully kick down that door. But I'm just happy that I'm still doing it, and I'm very active in it. But yeah, but I'm looking for the right opportunities.
And hey, there's a lot of those opportunities coming out. And if, based on what Triple H has talked about with his plans for, various NXT brands throughout the world, more and more opportunities may come in the future. Thank you so much. Again, tell us where everybody can check you out and follow you.
Yeah, just check me out social media, Instagram at T Keneley, and Twitter at Todd Keneley. I'm on Facebook too if you just look up Todd Keneley. But yeah, and check out United Wrestling Network. If you can see if you have it on traditional TV. If not, just look up Championship Wrestling. The new episodes hit on YouTube every Sunday. So do yourself a favor, have a nice Christmas present, and watch Jordan Clearwater, Danny Limelight for the world title. You won't be disappointed. And then if you get a chance too on YouTube, check out Up Next Fighting. If you are a fan of my work in pro wrestling commentary and want to hear what I sound like calling MMA, check out those fights and you can hear me doing.
And of course, we will have a link to all of your social media in the description of every video we do. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter at Armbars Sidebar, on Instagram, Armbars and Sidebars, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Armbars and Sidebars. Todd, thank you so much. You were so generous with your time, and it was a great time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Like I said, I always love talking wrestling. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for being so knowledgeable and prepared, knowing what to talk about with me. And for everybody, hey, fight on, and whenever this is going to air. Maybe happy holidays, or maybe right after the holidays.
I think after.
All right. Fight on, everybody.
Later, guys.